Hi, I'm Andrew Hyatt. I'm going to talk about LLM function calling in Emacs today. Basically, what is function calling? How could you use it in Emacs? And how do you actually make it work? So it's all relatively straightforward, so it is not going to be a long video. Basically, function calling is also called tool use these days. It's a way to ask the large language model to, given your text that you give it, call a one of several functions that you decide, like decide on what function to call and then call it with the argument of its choosing. And you give it enough information that it can make, like the idea is that it could, make uh, that call, in a structured, it's basically a way to do very structured things, and you could do it in a very precise way. It's not gonna, you don't have to worry about like parsing JSON and like things that are ordinarily a little bit of a pain with LLMs. So let me give you an example of how one use for it. So that I just wrote this the other day. I thought it'd be interesting to show. This is why I'm making this video. So I'm a dungeon master for D&D 5e. I've been doing this for years, and I really dislike creating names. I just don't like making names, and I'm not like a. There's many ways. Like if you look over the internet, there's tons of resources for creating names, and you could just ask an LLM also to create a name. But it's a bit of a pain. I have to go to another site. I have to copy paste, et cetera, et cetera. I might have to select like the race, the gender, the anyway. It's not great. But with LLM function calling, I could do it from inside Emacs, and it could just be part of my writing process. So let me demonstrate. So let's just say I'm writing a campaign, like a scene, and like the party meets with the elven king on his wooden throne. And then, who is the elven king? The elven king, we're going to insert a name. So we'll just say elven king, male. Sometimes it could, choose different names if you give it a little bit more detail. Elderly elven king. Okay, not bad. I could, every time I call it, it's going to give me something a bit different. So, his trusted advisor is a half orc. Let's say female half orc advisor to the king. Yeah, okay. Graha. Yeah, this looks good. And again, if I don't like it, just generate another one. Or, change the prompt a little bit, change what I'm giving it. So how do you make this work? And also, I wanted to point out, it's pretty fast. It's, there's no real noticeable delay here. Well, maybe slight, but it's pretty short. So I have this. This is not something I've checked in anywhere, but I have a gist out of it, and I'll put that gist. I'll make that gist available. But this is something I've been writing. I'm going to have more things in it soon. But first, I start out by we have to be able to have a provider. That provider is a LLM provider, and it has to be able to support function calling for this. So I don't. One of the things you can do in the LLM package that I did not do is you could actually check to see if that has function calling capability. I probably should be doing this, but it's a little bit of a complication here. So I'm not going to. I'm just going to keep it very simple. And I'm really writing this for my own use, so I don't really need to do that. But I have a provider and a small provider. The small, you don't need a lot of horsepower to generate a name, right? So you can use one of these small models that supports function calling. It's fast, it's cheap, and we give it a very small amount of information, and it outputs a very small amount of information. So it's all very, very cheap, very fast. The interesting thing here is the LLM insert name. You can see it's very small. There's not much going on here. We call LLM chat. Again, this is just part of the LLM package, which is free in new Emacs. And We call it with a provider, so we're going to use the small provider because it doesn't need a lot of stuff here. It doesn't need a lot of power. And we're going to call LLM make chat prompt to make the prompt that we feed it. So that prompt just needs the user input, which is the description, the context, so like instructions basically. So we give it instructions, we give it a temperature. We don't need to give it a temperature, but like it's, this is kind of a creative activity. The temperature may make a difference. I actually do not know if the temperature makes any difference or what the ideal temperature is, but I put something there. But the interesting part here is the functions. We give it a list of functions that it could call, and the LLM will decide which one to call. But in this case, we just give it one. We just want it to do one thing, right? So we have the context, which is kind of like matches what we want to do with what we want to call, what we want the LLM function to call, and if the user inputs something reasonable, it'll get called. So the first part of the function call is the actual function to call. So it's a function. It can have as many arguments as you want, and it can do whatever you want. But the arguments have to be listed down below. And everything here, you could kind of think of this as a structured way to have a docstring, right? There's just information about what the function does and what the arguments mean. And by reading this, the LLM can give you arguments, can call it in the appropriate place and give you arguments that make sense. So it's called insert name. One interesting caveat, this name, you have to use underscores. These things have to look like JavaScript functions, just as a byproduct on how these things were trained. Maybe, further advancements will be made, but I think this is likely to be true for some time, is that just make it look like JavaScript and it'll work better. We have a description, what does this function do? And we have the arguments. What's the name of the description, type, and is it required for every arg? So pretty simple stuff here. And by reading all this, the LLM will understand, okay, this is what this function does, this is how I call it, this is what it expects, and then it will provide those values, right? And so in this case, it's going to provide the value for the name based on the description that I give it, like male elven king. And then the function is called with, because the function calling is not with, the LLM cannot call your function, like it doesn't have that. We do that on the Emacs side, right? So as part of the LLM package. And that's it. This is how you do it. It's pretty simple. So I think the interesting thing is like, okay, this is one use. What are all the other uses that we could, stick in function calling to do something that was not really possible a few years ago, but required, is a structured thing that the LM can figure out how to call and could call it with something appropriate, and we can make use out of this in some way that'll help the user, which is what I've been using the name function all the time now, and it is actually helpful. And I think there's a lot of interesting possibilities for other helpful things that we could do. So I'm going to put in the description a link to this code just so you can see what it looks like, and I will put a link to the LLM package. So please, see what makes sense for you to do, and I look forward to seeing what people do with it. Thank you.